Hi, this is Debbie, and today's video is for a special hop over on my blog. The hop's organised by Leah Lawson in memory of her little boy Leighton. The aim of the hop is to raise funds for NICU parents, those parents with babies in neonatal intensive care units. The hop has over 30 sponsors who have kindly donated a bunch of prizes to give away. More on the hop later. For now, let's crack on with the card I made. As part of the hop, Leah provided a mood board and graphics, and the theme of the hop is encouragement. I was particularly inspired by the circular logo with mountains, trees, moon and stars, and immediately I knew the From the Rooftops stamp set from SSS Stamp was perfect for this. My aim for this card was to create a Shadowbox effect with lots of die cuts layered on top of one another, with each element fading into the distance. I started with the foreground layer, and for this I'm using the Evergreen Circle Die from SSS Stamp. I cut this from white card and then cut the card again with a stitched square die to create the foremost element of the shadow box. My plan had been to use the From the Rooftop stamp set for this card, but the more I thought about it and looked at the inspiration graphic, I decided I didn't want any black lines and would use just the matching die for the set. I'm going to be blending a lot of inks for this card. I often prefer the softer colours you get from ink blending rather than using coloured card. Also, this way I could mask off the snowy mountain tops and then blend ink over the rest of the die cut. So on a piece of white card I traced around the die to give me an indication of where I needed to blend the ink. Then on a piece of masking paper and with the stamp set for inspiration, I roughly drew out snowy mountain tops, trimmed them out and adhered them in place on the white card. I then blended smoke ink over the area indicated by the pencil lines. I made sure to use plenty of ink to give a smooth blend, and also, although this ink looks quite dark, the nature of dye inks is that the colour smooths out and lightens as it dries. I then used the die to cut the mountain range and remove the masking paper to reveal the snowy mountain tops. I erased any visible pencil lines and then lined up the mountains behind the trees. However, I noticed at this point that for the mountains to stand higher than the trees, that my die cut was too short, and once I had the mountain range in the right place, I had a gap showing at the bottom. So I repeated the ink blending process, and then this time I only partially die cut the mountain range. I did this by aligning the cutting mats of my die cutting machine so that the base of the mountains was sticking out of the sandwich. This way, when I ran the die through the die cutting machine, only the tops of the mountains were cut. I then used a scalpel and ruler to extend the line of the mountains. This way I had a much higher mountain range to fit behind the trees. I aligned the mountains and then drew a pencil line to indicate where to trim the base so that it wouldn't peek out at the bottom. Working backwards, my next layer was to be the moon and stars. In line with the inspiration, I pulled out Duckling ink and blended that into white card before using a nested circle die to cut the moon, and for the stars I used the large holiday shapes dies. I pulled out winter sky ink for the sky and again blended onto white card. I made sure to cover a large area as I wanted this piece to be slightly larger than the white front to the shadow box so that there was a blue edge all the way around. I used a tonic guillotine to trim the piece to size, and now the elements for this card are really starting to come together. However, I wanted to selectively colour the trees in the foreground. I masked off the surrounding area to leave just the trees showing, and then blended laurel green ink over the trees. Before compiling the card, I wanted to add a sentiment, and I chose the You Got This set from SSS Stamp, which I thought had a couple of appropriate sentiments. I was sticking with the sentiment, Hope is stronger than fear, but the one which really felt right to me was the sentiment, Keep your head up and your heart strong. I wanted the sentiment to curve around the edge of the window on the front of the card, and so I aligned the die cut in the mini MISTI and placed the die on top. I added a couple of glue dots to the back of the die so that when I closed the door of the MISTI, the die attached to the door, and I could then use the die to guide the stamp as I curved it around, and I knew that it would be perfectly aligned when I stamped it. I then removed the die and used smoke ink to stamp the sentiment. I stamped it twice to ensure a good solid impression which was easy to read. With all the elements now prepared, it was simply a case of putting them all together. I added strips of foam adhesive to the back of the Evergreen Circle foreground die cut and attached it to the mountains. I then added foam adhesive to the back of the mountains and aligned the moon. Finally, more foam adhesive, and I added the scene to the blue panel. I added small pieces of foam adhesive to the back of the two stars and added one in the background and one on the foreground. I then applied a generous application of Connect Glue by Gina and aligned the panel on a white card base. And that completes this card using layered die cuts to create a shadow box effect for this woodland scene. As I mentioned, this video is part of a hop, to raise funds for neonatal intensive care unit parents. The hop is being organised by Leah Lawson in memory of her son Leighton. You can find more details about Leah's story, the hop with lots of prizes from sponsors, and also how you can help too on my blog post at limedoodledesign.com, and I'll leave a link in the YouTube description below. I'll also leave links to the products that I've used today. I want to thank you for joining me, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you'd subscribe to this channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.